those perhaps will slow. And I think as what we are saying in terms of the economic contraction going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, so RBI has done a lot. I think all central banks have done a lot in terms of
Yes.
bringing in liquidity into the system and
Yes.
ensuring that interest rates are low.
Yes.
So I think I don't know. Are we uh, ready to start, madam, or
Yes,
no?
sir, I think we can start now. Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to today's core talk for HSS department. The agenda for today's talk is to explore various job and higher studies opportunities available for the students after graduation. For the talk, we have with us Dr. Nilesh Vernekar, our very own alumnus. He completed his PhD in economics from IIT Bombay and began his career as an investment banker in 1995 at Ashok Leyland Investment Services Limited. He has a leadership experience of more than 25 years in Indian financial services across private and MNC corporate banks like Standard Chartered Bank and Axis Bank, with track record and experience in credit markets, mergers and acquisitions, capital markets, equity and debt fundraising, and corporate finance. He has also conducted lectures in project finance and credit markets in the past at IIM Kozhikode. Currently, he is the Chief Investment Officer at Infra Debt Mutual Fund. Welcome, sir.
Hi, thank you, Amol, and thank you, madam, for joining today, and welcome you all for this session. I thought on a Sunday I didn't want to kind of have a lecture series, but I think a lot of questions were around what career prospects exist for students who are graduating this year and who would graduate in subsequent years. Uh, and I'm privileged, in fact, to be speaking on this forum. Did my PhD in economics uh, 10 years ago from IIT Mumbai. Been a banker almost for 25, I mean 20 odd years. Done banking as well as currently kind of running a mutual fund. So I thought a lot of questions which people have been asking were more centered around should they be kind of pursuing economic research post their graduation from IIT Mumbai economics, and should they be kind of pursuing master's studies. So I think I thought I will set the context by putting together what the ecosystem is in the country. I'm not focused on international markets in terms of who are the largest hirers or job creators, and which are the kind of components of the financial services ecosystem. So maybe I think I've just put together a short presentation. I'll just take you all through who are the kind of participants in the Indian financial services market. So the finance ecosystem in the country is largely driven by commercial banks. So you have the nationalized banks in the country, which are the SBIs of the world, BOBs, Bank of India, PNB, Canara Bank, Corporation Bank. Then you have the private sector banks, which are the likes of HDFC, ICICI, Axis, Kotak. Then you have the regional rural banks and the regional banks, which are South Indian Bank, City Union Bank, which are slightly smaller banks. Then you have the international banks who were also one of the hirers on campuses, the cities, HSBC, Standard Chartered Bank, Deutsche Bank, BNP, DBS Singapore. Then you also have the small finance banks, which were the microfinance companies, which have become small finance banks in the country, which were Bandhan, AU, Grameen. I'm sure many of you all would have heard of those institutions. A lot of these banks are also listed in the capital markets on the Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange. So this is the banking ecosystem which is there in the country, which is I think almost I would think more than 70-80% of hiring was happening in the past. This is before the pandemic. Going forward, also I would think there would be. I mean, in any kind of growing economy, you will need to have banks who will be the biggest participants for economic growth. Then you have the financial institutions, which are HDFC, IDFC, PNB, IFC Washington, ADB. So the whole host of FIs which are there in the market today, who have been existing for several decades in the country, and they've been also financial participants. So they've been pretty much participating in the lending function, giving corporate loans, project loans. Post that, you also have the non-banking finance companies, which are the shadow banks. So what banks were, essentially they kind of do a similar role to banks, but they are not they are regulated by RBI as well, but they also kind of perform lending functions. They lend to large corporates, small and medium enterprises. They also kind of do housing loans, some bit of micro loans and SME loans. And then you have the microfinance companies who have been the impact finance institutions who have been kind of essentially financing the underprivileged or the unbanked sector. I would request, I think if someone has any questions, you can interrupt, because I didn't want it to be a one-way discussion. So this is the kind of the banking and the financial services ecosystem. In the same ecosystem, you also have the mutual funds who are also, so the mutual funds under management, the funds that have management for mutual funds today is about close to 27 lakh crores. And you have the large mutual funds like SBI mutual fund, HDFC mutual fund, the UTI mutual fund, and the whole host of other kind of domestic and international mutual funds. Then you have insurance companies, the private equity funds, investment banks, stock broking companies, wealth management companies, rating agencies, the economic research organizations, stock exchanges, clearing corporations, and regulators. So I think, just to step back, so the large amount of roles which are getting created for an entry-level graduate today in the commercial sector and the commercial financial services sector would be, you would either kind of get in as a credit analyst, or you would, kind of get into, doing a lot of analytical and analysis work in some of these banks and the financial institutions. So your career path could be a first kind of beginning as a credit appraising manager or a credit analyst, and then evolving yourself into kind of several functional roles, and then assuming leadership roles. So, so to address your question, banks still continue to be the largest hirers. Some of the, in terms of specific roles in economic research firms. So the economic research firms was one of the questions which was asked. There are a few economic research firms, but in terms of their capacity to hire, perhaps I don't know whether they have so much of absorption capacity, because as students, when you pass out, you will see competition from several other institutions and several other educational colleges, and many of these companies and research firms have limited hiring capacity. So you will have to kind of explore multiple opportunities in terms of what is available and which are the companies which exist in the ecosystem today, and then accordingly kind of formulate your plans and strategies. So I've also kind of tried focusing on the banking sector, which is the largest employer of personnel today, and what are the kind of activities which banks generally do. So the main, so banks, as you are aware, are pretty much in layman words, it's pretty much borrowing money from depositors and from institutions, and then onward lending, right? So that's the basic kind of function of a bank. However, over a period of time, banking has become largely kind of technology oriented. You have several segments in banking. So the biggest segment in banking historically, both domestically and internationally, has been wholesale banking. So you have so banks essentially provide loans for working capital requirements or project requirements of companies. So they do kind of they do provide capital to the industry for growth, and it is largely provided in form of loans or investment in debt instruments or debt securities issued by some of these companies. Then you have the other category of industry segment is the small and medium enterprises, who also kind of borrow for their working capital needs or capex needs, and this is cutting across different sectors. So you have the core sectors of the economy, which is the automobile, the metal sector, cement, construction, manufacturing, consumer durables, and then you also have the services sector, which is technology, hospitality, healthcare, the power sector, telecom sector. So you have combination of the core manufacturing sector, the infrastructure sector, and all of this are traditionally, historically borrowers from the commercial banks. Then I think you have several other kind of banking products where banks do provide loans to companies and the promoters of companies for raising capital for their specialized needs. They may want to kind of invest equity capital into their businesses. So there are specialized lending categories also of wholesale banks. And then banks also perform a lot of fee-based activities, which is they help kind of arrange loans, for companies from other banks. So they kind of get participation from other institutions and banks, which is again combination of domestic loans. Some of the banks have foreign branches, so they're able to raise foreign currency loans for the industry. Then you have banks also providing capital market solutions, ratings advisory, and you also have banks helping some of the stressed companies to come out of this stress situation. So I mean, if you guys have been tracking the Indian banking industry, I think the Indian banking industry has been largely hit by a huge amount of impairment of loans on account of NPAs. It was also there before the pandemic. So you had a bit of an economic slowdown happening. Several companies had been going into stress, and the situation is only kind of accentuated during this pandemic times, which is why you would have heard of RBI giving moratorium to some of this to the industry, right? So for the first 6 months until August, corporate borrowers were allowed not to pay interest on their loans, and they could defer this interest, and then they would have to pay kind of interest on the loans going forward post August of 2020. And now RBI has also come out with some restructuring guidelines, which will enable some of the companies which have gone into stress because of pandemic to be able to restructure the loans so that they have some financial flexibility to service these loans over a longer period of time. So you had a situation in the country where we had growth slowing. Our exports were also contracting. We had a situation in terms of inflation not under control. And all of these factors were also affecting the industry. Plus, largely the Indian economy and the Indian companies were domestically oriented. So they were largely consumption-led businesses where companies were largely selling to the domestic markets. Exports obviously were there, but we were not competing like what happens with some of the Chinese companies who have been one of the largest exporters of core sector goods all across the world. So I think for us to kind of transform into a larger economy and also kind of come out of these challenging times, I think as a country we will need to kind of not only this China substitution story which you guys have been hearing about, but I think industry has to gear up to meeting the larger growth needs of the economy. And we don't want to see, while a lot of reports keep talking about contraction in the economy by 20%, some reports have been talking about 30% contraction. They've been talking about some sectors of the economy going through a large amount of disruption and stress. The hospitality sector, the airline industry also is going through some bit of a significant amount of challenges. So the sectors which are largely hit by the pandemic, I think will need support. And I think going forward, banks also will have to evolve into hand-holding some of these companies to be able to come out of this economic downturn. So which is why I'm saying that, I firmly believe that banking will be the core will continue to remain the core job creator going forward. And then further coming down to the other products of banks, which is financial markets, which you guys, I'm sure, in the economic courses which you guys have been doing, you would have come across treasury services, what banks do in terms of liability management, the CRR and the SLR requirements, which are the statutory requirements of banks, which banks have to manage, the money market functions, debt capital markets, and economic research. So the economic research function for many banks sits in financial markets, where you will have the bankers essentially doing core amount of fundamental research, both macro and micro, and then advising their banking counterparts in terms of how to evolve their strategies around lending, investing, and kind of running the banking function. You also have transaction banking. So I think you guys are all used to, the kind of internet services which banks have started providing, the UPIs, NEFT, RTGSs, Google Pays of the world. So I think banks have also evolved into technology platforms. And largely because of the transaction banking solutions which banks have been providing to customers. So the core transaction banking services are cash management, trade finance, where you support the industry. Plus, you also have the new technology-led services which many transaction banking businesses of banks do provide. And then you have the financial institutions group, that is banks also kind of cater to other banks and FIs and NBFCs. So they either lend to them or they kind of manage their kind of banking requirements. So these are the several product areas within commercial banks. So considering the areas which banks cover, I would think and I believe, and as I see it in the market, there are kind of job opportunities getting created for many of these product groups. And I think all of you students, I would believe, would be eligible for this role. So so long as you are passionate about what you do, what you have read up, as what Madam mentioned, that you got to kind of read up beyond what you guys have been studying, what's happening around you all in the industry, in the economy, and I'm sure you can kind of take up these roles, which will be largely entry-level roles. And as you get into these roles, I think there will be a lot of on-the-job learning for you all, because this banks do not expect you to kind of know all of this, at the stage when you're joining this institution. So these are largely entry-level roles for bank managers. And then a very important function for banks is credit risk and control, as you're aware, right? For every lending which you do for project loans or for OPEX loans, you need to have a filter in terms of which loans to approve, which loans not to approve, and that is one of the biggest areas where I think Indian banks have, I would think, not done a fantastic job or a good job, and that has resulted into large creation of NPAs in the system, and that is impacting the banking sector. Because imagine a situation where you have almost 15 to 20% of NPA ratio for banks. That means some of these loans don't service, and at the end of the day, banks have to remain responsible for servicing the depositors. So tomorrow, as a depositor, I cannot kind of expect my deposits not to be serviced because banks are not able to manage recoveries, which is why credit risk and credit risk control plays a very important role in banks. How banks finance the risk, how banks give loans, and what is the post-sanction and disbursement monitoring banks are required to do. They have to kind of follow up with borrowers for recovery of their dues. They have to ensure that some of these promoters, remain responsible to the banks. Industries don't collapse, and you've got to kind of, which is why your economic research will enable you to anticipate what the future trends in the industry will be, and that's where you will kind of have early warning signals, which you will kind of design and implement, because this is something which will be very important for you to ensure that banks take the most appropriate risk and have the right risk controls to manage the asset side of the banking. Because see, in banks, it's very important that as long as you manage the asset side of their business, that is the loan side or the lending side, I think you have all safety measures covered. I mean, if you remember what happened in the global financial crisis in the US in 2008, a lot of loans were given to subprime borrowers, and because of the high level of impairment and the risk which it had caused to the system, the whole banking system had to be bailed out. So, I mean, we in the country as well in India, our banking system is not in the best of financial health, which is why you have RBI coming out with measures to, regulate the kind of banks in terms of, setting up, and which is why credit risk control and credit risk plays a very important role. And then finally, you have the legal and regulatory compliances, which are very important in terms of legal and documentation requirements, and the regulatory compliances as laid out by RBI and SEBI, because RBI obviously regulates how banks operate in the country, and which is very important, because otherwise you will not have any control over what banks do in terms of lending and borrowing, and meeting up with what is required as regards to customer needs. Then another big business segment for the banks is retail banking, which are aware. You and me take retail loans, we take mortgage loans, personal loans, credit cards. Again, a very big function. A huge amount of questions which you guys asked is on analytics and quantitative finance. I think a lot of roles are getting created in retail banks, which cater to this particular requirement, because a lot of the retail banking going forward will be schematic oriented, technology led. A lot of algorithms are going to be used in terms of coming out with risk parameters of the underlying borrowers. So as you would have heard of CIBIL and the credit scores which retail individuals have, and which enables them to kind of have a credit score and borrow. So I would think in the past, I don't think Indian banks were so equipped with so much of quantitative analysis on retail borrowers. But going forward, I think everybody is getting prepared. So this is the time when you are not able to attend office. You're pretty much working from home, and this is where technology and some of these quantitative areas will have a very important role to play in retail banking. And then you have technology platforms, fintech solutions, which is again led by the digital banking teams of several retail banks. And you have another function in retail banks, which is wealth management, which is catering to the high net worth individuals, the priority kind of clients of banks who need wealth management support. So they have surpluses parked domestically, and they don't have idea of where to kind of invest. So deposits are not the best return generating investments today, because post tax and after adjusting for inflation, your bank deposits give you effectively negative returns because you're not able to beat inflation. So what are the other investment products what investors should look at, which is mutual funds, investing in bonds, which I have covered in subsequent sections. So this is pretty much on retail banking. And then I have also kind of covered, given a snapshot of the non-banking finance companies, which are pretty much shadow banks, as I mentioned. Why they called shadow banks is because they perform similar roles as banks, but they are not banks. So they don't have, they are not public deposit-taking institutions. They were at some point in time, but many of them have stopped, and they don't kind of, help you create savings bank or current accounts as what banks help you create. And they pretty much borrow largely from banks and FIs, and they onward lend to the industry. So this is a segment where ideally this role should be played by banks. But I think today, the banking system is not able to entirely meet with the industry demand for borrowing, which is both for wholesale, large corporates, and small and medium enterprises. And that's where NBFCs have found a niche opportunity to be able to kind of, be participant in that lending segment. And that's where you have many of this NBFCs mushroom, like L&T Finance, M&M Finance, Aditya Birla Finance. You have Tata Capital, Bajaj Finance, Sundaram Finance. I have listed down the names so you guys can go through it. And what are the kind of segments they cover? The main segment they cover is combination of corporate banking. They also provide small and medium enterprise loans, commercial vehicle loans, right? Auto loans is what some of these NBFCs also are very active in providing. You have many of these NBFCs providing retail loans or gold loans, like you have Muthoot and Manappuram, who kind of extend loans against your gold, ornament gold, basically. And then many of these banks also provide equity capital market services, which is more to do with helping companies or industry raise equity capital besides the borrowings or the debt capital, which they are usually used to consider while kind of meeting their capital market challenges. So I have also, I think it's, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take. Maybe I can, list down the questions which you guys have asked, and I can address those. And I have also listed down, madam, some of the, specifics. So this is a more generalistic kind of a discussion in terms of what the ecosystem is. But I think going forward, if students are also exposed to some of this specific uh, programs in business finance, which also have a lot of linkage with the economic courses or the courses in economics which they do in their second year and final year and of course first year. So uh, because a lot of the kind of work which you would be doing in micro and macroeconomics can be also related to the industry, and a lot of it is relevant in the industry. So I've just kind of listed down what the future, business finance topics could be, which could be, we could go down into. So each of this would be a module, which could be corporate and project finance, appraisal, special situation financing, leverage financing, credit markets, debt capital markets. Then you have equity capital markets, investment banking and M&A, and corporate treasury and finance. So I think we could have programs designed for each of these segments if you believe there is potential, and then we would try to see how we can relate it to the area of economics. So it could be business finance and economics is something which I thought should be a larger subject area. So so I will just kind of read out what questions were raised before I kind of took up this discussion. So the first question which was raised by one of the students was, is there any opportunity for economics graduates at economic research firms just after graduation, and how does the growth look like? So my response to that was, I think there are very specific economic research firms, which is CMI, you have CSO, you have Dun& Bradstreet, the rating agencies as well, which is your ICRA, CARE, India Ratings. But I would think the roles in economic research are also relevant and are also there in many of these banks and financial institutions. So I would think, as students, if you guys are planning to pursue jobs in the industry, then you will need to have a much more wider scope, because by having a very focused, narrowed approach in looking at only a few specific research firms is not going to be relevant, because there may not be enough job opportunities available. Second thing is, the second question was on should I pursue master's studies in economics or finance? So yes, I think after your undergrad or after you graduate out, pursuing a course in Masters of Finance or in economics or an MBA, I think will be very relevant. My only suggestion here is that the moment you start looking at some of these programs, you will have to kind of evolve yourself into looking at multiple facets in terms of job opportunities. You cannot be confined only to one particular industry. So, like I mentioned, yes, the finance ecosystem is large enough, but I would also think that students should also gear themselves up to be looking at jobs in the corporate sector, where corporate treasurers also are one of the largest employers of finance students, finance and economics students, basically. And of course, I would also think, students should look at an opportunity to pursue academics, because, today the education institutes in the country do need brighter students, brighter minds for, kind of conducting some of this specific specialized courses. And I think that also plays a very important role when it comes to job opportunities. The third question, the last question was, can you explain pros and cons of going for masters in quantitative finance? I think the advantages I have listed down. If you've done a masters in quantitative finance, you obviously you stand a chance to kind of take up a role in in the banking sector, or it could be in a financial institution or a mutual fund. However, I would still advise, while you might have done a course in quantitative finance, but it's again important for you to relate that program with the industry. So you will have to see how relevant the program is and how much, and your learning, how can you apply your learning to what the requirements of the industry are. So that is something which you will have to really kind of well upon. And the last question was, when and how did you get to know that the financial route was for you and not consulting or analytics? Okay, so that is a very interesting question because I am also an engineer by background, but and I mean I chose banking because again in 1995 when I kind of got into the financial service and banking role, those were the kind of opportunities which were relevant and available at that point in time because the industry jobs in technology were far and few, and the larger part of the job absorption was happening in the banking and financial service industry. And since I had done my MBA in finance after that, it just widened the scope of what I wanted to do, and hence, I chose banking and not consulting because consulting becomes very, I would think, specialized. And I never wanted to be a specialist. I always believe that it's always good to have you should have your own domain expertise, but you should also have a more generalist approach so that in this current pandemic times, right, you can evolve yourself into taking up multiple roles or newer roles, or upgrade your skills to be able to kind of identify what opportunities exist for you and accordingly dovetail your career into that. So I mean, this obviously did not exist at that point in time, but I did choose the career in banking and financial services because A, I was passionate about it, and B, it was a very interesting role because I always wanted to kind of see how I can integrate my industry knowledge with the needs which banks provide to corporates and to the industry. So that was pretty much why I chose to kind of do this.
Sir, we
So
have a
Amol, I
question.
think, yeah.
Yes, sir, I have a question in the chat box. So,
Okay.
sir, what new opportunities open up after a PhD in economics versus after graduation?
Okay. So PhD in economics, again, ideally should lead into a role into consulting or into academics. Right? I mean, there are very few kind of people I've seen. I'm an exception who has been a PhD in economics and has been a practitioner. So I have been more of a practitioner because of the kind of jobs and roles which I have kind of led in the past. So which is why I said if you do a PhD in economics, I think you would want to look at roles which is combination of a role of an economic researcher or an economist in a bank, or pursue academics, or they could be roles in consulting companies like BCG, McKinsey's of the world, who also do core fundamental research. As against the question which you had asked me was as against graduation. So, I mean, either you've done your graduation or a master's, be it an MBA or a Master of Finance or Master of Economics, then I'm sure there are roles which are kind of all available in not only the banking sector but also in the corporate sector. And I think you guys, I think what I know of is there are a lot of KPOs who have been visiting campuses, right, at IIT Bombay, who have been hiring students. But I think that is more to do with not fundamental research. Though I think in the current times, you could look at those roles. These are roles from JP Morgan, Citi, who hire students at the graduate level, and which is part of a KPO service offering, which is more like a sophisticated BPO, and you will do a lot of secondary market research. What I only wanted to kind of convey a strong thought here is there is a huge amount of opportunity set in the Indian context itself, right? And so long as you are aware of what the opportunities are and what your interests lie, you can choose those opportunities. Be it banking, be it mutual funds, be it NBFCs, be it financial institutions, be it rating agencies. I mean, I have described all of the likely kind of uh, companies who could be potential hirers. Does that answer?
Yeah, I hope that answers the question. So, we can open the Q&A session now. Guys, if you have any question, please post the question in the chat box. Sir, there is another question. How do you see masters in economics versus MBA?
Okay. So I think MBA is a very generalistic program which will help you cover marketing, finance, HR, systems. So it will give you a lot more, not only a bird's eye view, but it will also help you become a generalist. Now, why do you do an MBA after doing a specialized course in economics or engineering? Or I have known of students who have done their medicine and have done their MBAs, right? So in fact, in one of my previous organizations, we had hired a doctor who had done her MBBS, and she was actually in the field working as a doctor. And then, she found limited growth opportunities, didn't want to kind of pursue so much of medicine, and then she did an MBA. So MBA will essentially kind of help you understand multiple industries, multiple kind of companies, and it will help you become a more of a journalist. So which is why as an MBA, you may, if you are kind of shown an opportunity, say in Whirlpool or an HUL in marketing, right? That could be a role which you may find it exciting. It could be a finance role, it could be a marketing role, or it could be an HR role. In When you do your masters in economics, I mean, madam can correct me, is yes, I think you can even take up this role. So there is nothing, confined to that. Company should not hire students from. But the thing is, once you do your masters in economics, you will have a more focused perspective on research, both micro and macro research, and you will perhaps be considered for more specialized roles in some of these rating agencies or economic research firms or in banks. But I don't know how much of relevance you will have in some of this FMCG companies or a consumer durable company, or some of the companies which are in the technology sector as well, who are the largest employers today. But like I said, while doing a master's in economics, nothing stops you from integrating your knowledge of economics into what is there expected in the industry. Because the way I see it is, a lot what you study in economics is also a lot of it is an input to the industry. So the idea is to kind of if you want to kind of pick up a job, you've got to become business managers, right? So I don't think there will be any restriction, but yes, an MBA will give you a lot more wider opportunity set and more optionalities as compared to doing a specialized program in eco.
Okay, sir, we have another question. What are the opportunities for the graduate in PSUs?
Okay, so public sector organizations, yes, are one of the largest hirers. And if you look at the large, so one is, so you've got to divide PSUs into two categories, right? One is the industry PSUs, which are the take the industry large PSUs. You have the oil marketing companies, IOC, ONGC, HPCL, BPCL. Then you have the capital goods companies like the BHELs of the world. Then you have the metals companies like a Steel Authority of India Limited. You have Bharat Electronics. So there is a huge wider set of PSU companies. So you have to obviously, I think they do come on campuses, which I'm aware, and some of these companies also have an entrance exam for hiring students. So they will not differentiate. So they do kind of go to business schools for hiring. They do kind of look at reputed institutes like IITs as well. I don't know whether they are coming on campus this year for you all. So that is the industry part of it. Then you also have the PSU, the FI and banking set. So you have the whole banking PSU pack, right? Which is the SBIs of the world, PNBs, Bank of India, BOBs. Of course, a lot of these banks are going through a lot of restructuring because banks lack capital today, and I think they have a huge impairment and NPA challenges. But yes, they also kind of, so there could be jobs also for students in that segment. The only challenge is that the banking jobs will be, for students who pass out will be PO's jobs, which is the probationary officers jobs, which for which you will have to kind of make an, either they come on campus or else you have to go through their entrance exam. So they have a proper full-fledged entrance test, which you qualify, and then there is an interview, and there's a selection process. So you have to go through the entire selection process. The only thing which I would highlight here is that the remuneration and the compensation structures of PSU institutions is not of that high order. So which is why a lot of jobs a lot of students prefer to get into the private sector, because the relative compensation structures are a lot more better in the private sector companies. So yes, I think, but I would think that for a early stage graduate student who's passing out, a PSU job also could be a fantastic learning opportunity. I think the kind of learning which you will kind of get in some of these PSU institutions, both industry and when I meant industry is both manufacturing and financial services, that will be fantastic, because these institutions have been there for several decades now, and they are very relevant to the Indian economy in terms of the contribution to GDP which they make, and there's a lot of them in the manufacturing side are very profitable companies and have huge balance sheets. So in terms of learning and in terms of future growth prospects, I think, why not? You can always begin with a PSU and always move to private sector. The only challenge in PSU sometimes is, a lot of times, is getting adjusted to the private sector when you are coming from PSU, because PSU, the whole value systems, the culture is way different from how private sector companies operate. Because private sector companies will be a lot more demanding, they'll be profit oriented significantly, and the work and demand, the demand on work and work pressures are significantly high in the private sector. Yeah, so they are, because all of this are, at the end of the day, listed companies, they are answerable to shareholders, so they need to create shareholder value. But I think in terms of longevity, I think PSU jobs are perhaps the best, because I think in a PSU job, in times of uncertainties, a private sector company, you could have situations of layoffs or restructuring, which happens in the private sector, but irrespective of your competence. But in the PSU sector, I think you're pretty much wedded to those organizations, for long term. So, I would recommend, at an early stage, entry level jobs, please pursue that as an opportunity as well.
Nilesh, I just want to come in for a minute.
Yeah, madam.
Yeah. I don't know whether the students are aware that IITs have now started this year GATE for humanities and social sciences. So
Okay.
there GATE enables GATE enables one to be listed for PSU jobs. So if you
Okay.
have
Oh,
PSUs, they also
yeah,
offer jobs according to your GATE score. So this
sure.
year there are 6 papers in which GATE to 2021 will be taking place. These are economics and other 5 social science subjects. So
Okay.
students may also think of giving a GATE, obtaining a GATE score, which can
Okay.
also enable them to apply for PSU
Mm.
jobs, and these
Yes.
are scores are
Right, 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 right,
sort of
right.
taken into
Sure,
considerations
sure.
while giving PSU
Right,
jobs.
right, right. No, I agree, I agree. And more so, I think all of this courses and the programs, madam, which you've been running and conducting, I think all of them, I'm sure, are eventually scoped around to getting more of industry jobs, right? So both PSUs and private sector. So
Yeah, both industry and policy making bodies like the World Bank,
Yes.
IMF, RBI, basically central banks and
Right.
multilateral institutions, etc. So we are trying to pitch our courses to that. And
Sure.
I think, the most important thing is that unless you know the subject,
Yes.
the emphasis on knowledge has to be equally important than job search.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so unless
Yes.
you are well versed with what
Yeah.
what is being taught and what you research, your core competency will come out of your knowledge.
Correct.
Uh, and the marketing is an addition,
Sure.
search,
Sure.
job search,
Sure.
etc. is an additional this thing,
Correct.
activity that you have to indulge into. But focus should be in terms of learning and
Sure.
more and more
Sure.
time to be
Sure.
devoted to
I agree.
understanding the present realities and also
I agree.
relevance of
Sure.
uh,
Sure.
uh, what you learn in your courses. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
So because each of these modules, while I have not spoken in depth across all of the segments and what you also just spoke is each of this can be itself a research, in sense, the kind of learning which you will have to do in every kind of, say, even if you pick up a stock exchange like an NSE, right, or a BSE, the whole amount, or maybe a rating agency. So the amount, I think, so it's important for students to, like you mentioned, just you cannot stop learning. I mean, even today I keep learning. I mean, all these things which I, was able to design was just pretty much from my own kind of, exposure and past learnings. And, as you kind of get into, I kind of like researching every aspect of what is an opportunity available, right? So if you even look at, say, like we mentioned, stock exchanges and all. So there's so much in a stock exchange which happens, right? It's itself is a long tenor kind of learning experience. So students will have to kind of, depending upon their interest, they will have to kind of research out and go take a deep dive and be a lot more detail oriented to be able to kind of, uh, uh, become relevant and equip themselves for those roles.
Sir, we have another question the students have put up. Sir, could you please elaborate on the exit options after PhD in economics abroad?
Okay. No, so like what also Madam mentioned that after your PhD in economics, you obviously can take up roles in IMF, the World Bank. So World Bank has IFC Washington. You also have ADB, which is the Asian Development Bank. Then you have the regulators, right, which is the European Central Bank, Bank of England, Federal. So and of course RBI here and SEBI here, which is the capital markets regulator. So post doing your PhD in terms of international options, yes, I mean you can apply for these roles. You can look up the site of IFC Washington. They do have roles for the economic graduates. In fact, they are a lot more infrastructure focused, IFC Washington, because they are essentially an institution created by World Bank to develop the infrastructure sector in emerging economies, which is largely your Asia, Africa, and Brazil and Russia. So you will find IFC Washington a very, very prominent company. It is a financial institution who is also one of the large hirers. So I think when you look at international jobs, so this is a foreign financial institution. Likewise, like I said, internationally, this will be there will be jobs, but it's not so kind of easy for you to land a job in an IMF, or you guys have to be very, very passionate, detail oriented, research oriented, and there is no substitute for hard work. So you guys, I mean, so long as you have a passion towards it, you know what these institutions do and what is expected of you from these companies or institutions. I'm sure there are you can apply to these institutions and can land an opportunity there.
Yeah.
But like I said, on the, I mean, if you look at the statistics in terms of India, uh, I mean, we have, I think, in terms of the middle-aged population, I think India perhaps has the highest middle-aged population in the world today. And as a country, we need to create almost 10 million jobs every month. And these are again students passing out from, of course, tier one institutions and tier two institutions. So my focus has been always in terms of how do we expand the how do we make or how you as students become more employable, and and what are the kind of tools which you need to build into yourself. So I think all of these topics are all pretty much available on the net. You can research it out, and depending upon your interests, you can align yourself to many of these roles. So and then accordingly kind of think of applying. So like I said, if you ask me, a batch of 30 students getting absorbed in RBI, not likely. But maybe one or two students getting a job in RBI, yes, quite likely. But out of the balanced 28 students, I mean, are there roles in rating agencies, stock exchanges, mutual funds, insurance companies? Yes, I think there are roles. So, I mean, which is why you'll have to kind of, identify what your interest areas lie and then accordingly think of applying. So, coming back to your question, yes, international opportunities do exist in the companies which I mentioned.
Sir, to that, following up on that question, the person has asked, entry level roles into RBI is only through entrance exam, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Sir, next question.
So, yeah.
How much, in your view, are graduates in economics accepted in or suited for actuarial jobs?
Okay. So, actuarial jobs are largely in insurance companies. So you have the public sector insurance companies like the likes of LIC, GIC, New India, Oriental Insurance, and you have the private sector insurance companies which are HDFC Life, ICICI Prudential, Max Life, Bajaj Alliances. So actuarial roles are a lot to do with uh, risk roles, right? So you essentially are evaluating, how risky the counterparty is, who's being covered by insurance, by the insurance companies. So actuarial roles are great roles, in my opinion, and the segment which can give you actuarial roles are the insurance companies in the country today. So by all means, I mean, please pursue actuarial roles. They are, uh, uh, I mean, lot more to do with your fundamental research which you guys have done during your undergrad, and you will obviously kind of get a significant business exposure when you look at actuarial roles in insurance companies. Essentially, if you know of the insurance sector, have insurances covered for the retail segment, which is you and me, and you have health, you have term, you have endowments, and you also have a lot to do with industrial insurances. So large companies and large factories do take insurances, fire insurances, loss of profit insurances. So all of the analysis is done by the actuarial team, who do a fundamental risk assessment. Because see, the last thing what insurance companies want to lose is to kind of settle claims, right? Because they take premium. What is the business model of insurance companies? Your revenue line is collecting premium from the people who take insurance, and your expenses on the claims which are kind of onto the insurance companies. So long as you kind of are able to identify or reduce the risk of the claims getting devolved onto the insurance companies, then you have a profitable insurance company. So I'm just kind of now I've never worked for an insurance company, so but I've read so much about insurance companies and how they operate and how their business models are. Uh, so I would recommend even those roles are interesting roles. Yeah. And the way to apply is, like I said, LIC, GIC, again, entrance test. You can look up the LIC's websites and look at applying there. But private sector insurance companies are again through direct applications, placement agencies, or through referrals. But yes, there is enough scope for students to look at that as well. And in fact, another important function of insurance companies also in investing. So they also operate like mutual funds. So they invest into debt securities, equities as well. Because at the end of the day, the premium which they collect, that has to be managed. They have to generate returns on the investment so that they are able to meet with the potential claims which would arise onto them in the event of the person taking insurance, needing that basically. So you have, besides the ones I mentioned, you have auto insurance. So the insurance segment is a very growing segment. I think it's a very fantastic. It's a good question you guys asked, because this is one sector which is seen as a significantly growth sector, because it is underpenetrated today. I don't think many of us in the urban centers do have insurance coverages, but not in the rural segments. What I understand is that our insurance penetration ratio is not more than 10% in the country today. So there is a huge amount of scope for the insurance sector to kind of expand and grow. Unlike banking, right? Banking is pretty much now, after the Jan Dhan, and you have a huge segment of the Indian population which is fairly banked today, and the underbanked are covered by microfinance companies. But yes, insurance is a growth sector. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are. I think that's all for the questions. There are no more questions in the chat box.
Okay.
So I think we can conclude the session now.
No. Thank you. It was my privilege to have spoken on this forum. While this is a very, very brief kind of snapshot of what opportunities I thought were relevant for students who are graduating out and ones who will graduate out in the subsequent years. But my larger theme here is like what Madam mentioned: pursue your program very, very honestly and diligently. There is no substitute for hard work. There is. It's not only go beyond what you guys have been learning in classroom sessions. Try to kind of network well, read a lot about what is happening in the industry, because I think we are in for a very uncertain period going forward. Nobody knows what future is going to look like, right? And all of us, including seasoned, experienced personnel, would find it difficult to chalk out what the career path is going to be like. So, which is why it's important for all of you to kind of remain. I think the level of alertness has to be even more higher today as compared to the past. You can't be complacent about your own selves. Be passionate about what you like doing. Pursue your passion, and like I said, it's not only getting a job. I think many times I keep asking myself that why can't you be job creators? If you guys believe in yourself, and and that is going to help the economy. I mean, just by kind of landing yourself a job and doing a 9 to 5 job, that is going to help. Right, going forward as a country. So I have been a big believer. Yes, I think I have been myself into a job for so many years, because there is something just called a comfort factor in a role, right? You do a job, but I think there itself you need to look at areas where you can not only upgrade your skills but also potentially be a job creator. So it could be anything. I mean, like one of you guys mentioned that someone's father has a factory who runs it, and you can yourself go and set up an SME company and create employment. And it is not that just because you've done your program in economics or an MBA, you cannot kind of implement or execute a manufacturing company or set up a services company. You can yourself go and set up a research company. Why not? I mean, the economic research, which you guys are saying that let me get a job there. Maybe initially you may want to just do it for 4 or 5 years, but longer term, create it. Because I think this is going to be, I mean, this whole disruption and dislocation of markets, has caused pain to people who are already in the employment sector. I mean, I don't know whether you guys are aware that almost about 20 million people were out of the employment roles as per the CMI research in the first 6 months post the pandemic. No, I don't want to be sounding, negative, but I'm just saying that, we are in such unprecedented times that we need to kind of, be ready for a change. And the readiness has to be even more, even more intense, in these times. Madam, I mean, do you agree? I mean, I thought, otherwise, I mean, absolutely, I have nothing more to add here. But going forward, I think besides what the universe is looking like, maybe I think we should have some specific specialized sessions on some of the modules which I have described in my last slide, so that students, try to develop interest in some of these areas, which is an integration of what you study and what the industry is expected of you and how the industry looks like.
Yeah, and I think analytical abilities and econometrics. If you do properly, then that
Yeah,
is like an infrastructure. A kind of a educational infrastructure that you are creating. So focus on how to analyze and how to
yeah,
use data and how to
correct,
draw
absolutely.
inferences from data, etc. These are the skills where you will have to invest a lot of your time, and that will give you some advantage, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, madam, I mean, do the students also have? I mean, is there a placement cell as well? I mean,
Yeah, there
considering
is
this. Yeah.
placement there.
Okay. 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 Okay.
And if you can help us with
Of
placement,
course.
that would be, yeah.
No, no, no. I mean, goes without saying. I will certainly kind of,
Yeah.
use my industry network to recommend, some of the companies to come on campus, and let's see how it evolves. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it should not be a challenge because the batch strength, as I understand, is only 30. So, in
Yes.
my view, yeah, yeah, it should
And
be
also,
easy. Yeah.
this year, because of this pandemic, etc., the internships did not. I mean,
Okay.
students could not do internships as well as
Okay.
they would have. So
Right.
we would
Right.
be interested in seeing to it that the students get internships in good places where they can learn
Right.
something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 And what about RBI, madam? RBI is not. I
RBI,
don't know.
we are in negotiation with RBI, but
Okay.
RBI is generally interns are postgraduate students and not
Okay.
undergraduate.
Okay.
This,
Okay. Okay.
but
Right.
we are trying our level best, but
Correct.
we have not
Yeah.
succeeded
Uh,
because RBI is busy right now. There is nothing more than they are doing. I mean, basically, they are very busy with their own statutory commitments, etc.
I know. I know. I
Yeah,
know. I think fixing the banking system. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's become very important. Anyway, so thank you all for being part of this session, and hope to see you all again. Thank you, madam, for your valuable contribution, and also to
No.
the team who organized this. It was wonderful having spoken on this forum. Look forward to speaking again.
Thank you,
Thank
sir, for
you,
taking out time to take such an insightful session. And thank you, ma'am, for joining us today.
Nitin. My privilege.
On a Sunday. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it just
Yeah.
becomes a bit sometimes boring, but anyway, I think we should make it a lot more interesting and interactive. I mean, yeah, virtual sessions sometimes become a monologue. Yeah, yeah. Thank
Thank
So
you.
I
you.
think we can conclude the session now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you, Nilesh.
See you,
Huh?
madam. Yeah.
Yeah,
We'll
it
connect.
was
Yeah,
good
we'll
to
connect.
meet you.
Yeah, thank you.